When you have become adjusted to simple living in regard to your bodily wants, do not preen yourself about the accomplishment, and so likewise, if you are a water drinker, do not on every occasion say that you are a water drinker. And if you ever want to train to develop physical endurance, do it by yourself, and not for outsiders to behold. Do not throw your arms around statues, but on occasion, when you are very thirsty, take cold water into your mouth, and then spit it out without telling anybody.
Chapter 47 has to do with our bodies, and also even more so with our minds, in particular our faculty of choice and our judgments about ourselves. But it has even more to do with the outside world comprised of other people, what we can call the social world, which for us also includes the online internet world, just as much as the world that we socialize in face-to-face. And Epictetus is counseling us against something that we could call outward show or vanity, or even, if you like, pride in what we have disciplined our body to do. So this is, if we want to use another metaphor here, this is a way of saying how people depart from the Stoic path. If you think about the Stoic path as being this almost like going up a mountain, right? And going around a bunch of twists and turns, but eventually getting to a place where what you're supposed to be enjoying is freedom and tranquility and happiness. There's a lot of steps along the road. And a person might go part of the way along the road and then veer off into something quite different. And disciplining the body works like that as well. If your main goal is to discipline your body so that you can actually not be bothered by it and not have its demands pressing upon you, not see it as something that you have to attend to all the time so that you then can make progress as a Stoic, that's one thing. If you're disciplining the body because you want to subdue it, or you want to show everybody how tough you are, or make yourself feel like you're really in charge of things. This is one reason why a lot of people do, in fact, engage in bodily discipline, because it gives them the feeling of control over something that the Stoics would say actually is outside of your control. Then you've departed from the Stoic path in very serious ways. And so we'll look at some of the examples that he gives here and the advice, and then I've got a few other examples to throw in as well. So he says, when you've adjusted to simple living in regard to your bodily wants, do not preen yourself about the accomplishment. So, for example, if you're a water drinker, what does that mean? If you're a water drinker instead of somebody who's drinking wine or drinking other things, right? If that's your thing, then don't go around telling everybody, do not on every occasion say that you are a water drinker. If it happens to come up and somebody really presses you on it, that's fine for you to tell them. But you don't need to go to the bar and say, I only drink water. You don't need to make a big thing of it, as we say. If you want to train to develop physical endurance, do it by yourself and not for outsiders to behold. As he says, here's a great, funny example. Do not throw your arms around statues, but on occasion, when you're very thirsty, take cold water into your mouth and then spit it out without telling anybody. So we've got a real contrast here. Now, what's this business about throwing your arms around statues? Well, this is something that the great Cynic philosopher Diogenes was supposed to have done in order to, he would do this when it was cold, to accustom his body to the cold, right? He wanted to subdue his body so that he could show that the mind was more important than the body, or the soul, or the will, or whatever you want to say. So, how do we do these sorts of things today? Here we have just a multitude of examples. And I think that we are in a culture that has many more temptations towards this sort of behavior than, say, 50 years ago or 100 years ago. It's not that people didn't exercise or diet or do anything like that, but we have turned it into, lifestyle choices, and we've got an entire industry, whole industries that cater to this sort of thing. As a matter of fact, we even have differentiation within it. So if you've ever seen the Planet Fitness ads about how their gym is different than the lunkhead gyms, right? It's still all the same thing. You can show off what you're doing at any of these gyms, going in and puttering around or even being serious and really applying yourself. If you're doing it, here's sort of a rule of thumb. If you're doing it and then you're looking around to see who's looking at you, or maybe you're looking in the mirrors because these places all have lots of mirrors. If you're doing that, then you're doing it for somebody else. Or you're doing it so that you can have something in relation to somebody else. If you find yourself, engaging in a healthier diet, but you need to make a big thing of it. Every time you go to the restaurant, you tell everybody that you've cut out gluten or that you're vegan or whatever it is that you want. Then you're following the advice that Epictetus is saying you shouldn't follow, right? You shouldn't try to make a big thing of yourself. You shouldn't try to show off your choices, you might say. We live in a society that's even more subject to temptation about this because we have entire movements, right? It used to be if you went for a run for some sort of activity, that was fine. Now you get a t-shirt, you get to sign up on the website, you get to let everybody know what a swell person you are for running for this or that, right? And you're doing the run, right? You're training for the triathlon. You're doing all these sorts of things. Epictetus is saying, hey, if this is about Stoicism and about, controlling your body so that you aren't going to be bothered by it, so that you can focus on what's really important, which is your personality, then don't do things that are actually damaging to your personality, like showing off to other people, like making a big thing of it so that they can then give you praise and you can feel great. Also, don't do the thing that people do where they become obsessive about their body because they want to have some area in which they have control. They do that because they're so out of control with respect to their emotions, with respect to their thoughts, with respect to what they could have control over. So Epictetus' advice here of taking the sip of water on a very hot day and then without anybody else seeing it, spitting it out. We could multiply this into a whole bunch of other exercises where you're working on yourself and you're not worried about what other people are seeing, thinking, or even whether you're developing some sort of essentially pathological control over your body.
This is the position and character of a layman. He never looks for either help or harm from himself, but only from externals. This is the position and character of the philosopher. He looks for all his help or harm from himself. Signs of one who is making progress are: he censures no one, praises no one, blames no one, finds fault with no one, says nothing about himself as though he were somebody or knew something. When he is hampered or prevented, he blames himself. And if anyone compliments him, he smiles to himself at the person complimenting. Well, if anyone censures him, he makes no defense. He goes about like an invalid, being careful not to disturb, before it has grown firm, any part which is getting well. He has put away from himself his every desire, and has transferred his aversion to those things only of what is under our control, which are contrary to nature. He exercises no pronounced choice in regard to anything. If he gives the appearance of being foolish or ignorant, he does not care. In a word, he keeps guard against himself as though he were his own enemy lying in wait.
At multiple places in his discussions, Epictetus will differentiate between what we're translating here as the layperson, the idiotes in Greek, the person who is not versed in philosophy or practicing philosophy, meaning Stoic philosophy, and the person who is in some way a philosopher in that they're pursuing a philosophical path. Here he talks in terms of the person who is making progress, the prokopton, the one who is advancing, not necessarily in terms of the person who's actually made it to the end and has it all together. And he says, here's what a person who is not making progress looks like, the person who is at the starting point, we might say. He never looks for help or harm from himself. That's a key thing right there. He never looks for help or harm from himself, but only from externals. So, this could extend as well to those who rely upon their bodies to get them through things. It could be because of physical attractiveness. It could be because they've built up, great, physique or something like that, and they think that that's going to get them through the problems, or they've been doing a lot of yoga or, whatever. Other externals that people rely upon: wealth, reputation, other people's opinions and viewpoints, position. We could go through all sorts of examples of the things that Epictetus says are external and outside of our control. And the person who is not engaged in Stoic thought is going to naturally, because this is the way human beings do in fact behave in our cultures, naturally think that that's where our help really lies. That's where our security lies. So they don't look within. And he says, this is the position and character of the philosopher. He looks for all his help or harm from himself. So that's the ideal. The philosopher looks within and finds the resources that he or she needs. As Epictetus has told us in other passages, if we do in fact look within, we may not find the full-blown virtue, if we haven't developed it yet, of temperance or justice, but we do find the resources that we need, and we realize that we have choices to make. If we allow ourselves to be overcome by situations that don't have to overcome us, that is our choice. And if we thought that, waiting for some sort of external thing, like somebody else to come in and save the day, was the right thing to do, well, that's part of why we failed. And we could have chosen otherwise. And if you look back through your life, if you decide that you want to go on this path, you'll see plenty of juncture points where you could have chosen otherwise. Instead, you look for help or harm from the externals. Now he says, the signs of a person who is making progress are these. He doesn't blame anybody. He doesn't censure, is how it's translated here. Tege is the Greek term for it. He also praises nobody. Now, does that mean that you can't ever say to your colleague or your child or your friend, oh, good job, or anything like that? No, it doesn't mean that you can't do that. Praising in the sense of, lauding excessively, saying that this person has really totally got it together, they've finished the goal of life, or anything like that. He also blames no one. He finds fault with no one, says nothing about himself as though he were somebody or knew something. So two very important things. Blaming and finding fault. Again, the person who is not practicing this is going to blame other people. They lose their temper, it's that person's fault. They had a bad day, it's the world's fault. Traffic is getting to them. Why can't all these people get the hell off the road? We can go on and on with examples like this. And censuring, blaming, finding fault with, these are things that gradually are going to get phased out as one practices Stoic philosophy. Why would they get phased out? Because you realize that those are things that lie within other person's power, or perhaps the power of natural processes, not within one's own power. So they're not things that can really harm you or help you, and you're going to cease to be quite so attached and upset about them. You're, in technical terms, you're not going to let your desire and your aversion go out into the world where they're vulnerable to being disappointed. Now, the other part, saying nothing about oneself as though he were somebody or knew something. This doesn't mean that one has to be affected and pretend like one doesn't know anything when somebody calls on you in class, when you're in the meeting and you do have a good idea. But you're not going to talk about yourself as if you're an important person. You'll just talk about yourself as a person. And the world is full of persons, right? There's a whole bunch of them. You're concerned more with one than others because you're that person. But there's no reason why everybody else should be subjected to your own narrative, your own interpretation of how you, fit into the grand scheme. They can figure that out, right? If it's based in reality, hopefully they can see that. Even if they don't, that's up to them. It's not up to you. So, getting into this practice of saying, yes, I'm not really somebody that matters, except to myself and perhaps the people who decide that I matter to them. He goes on and he says, when a person like this is hampered or prevented, he blames himself. Now, this is a very important point. So, one of the goals of Stoicism is to reach a point where we're not being hampered or prevented, we're not being restricted, because we're only choosing to do the things that we actually do have control over. We're only choosing to want things to be the way that they are, or choosing to manage the little bit of area that we have, which is ourselves, to make things be the way that we want them to be. So when we find ourselves being hampered or hindered, it's in part because we've let other things come in and decide for us. So here's an example. We all have bodies, and the bodies quite often don't look the way we would like or act the way that we would like, and as they age, there's probably more and more of this that happens for most of us, right? Perhaps some people age very well, but that seems to be, in large respect, not just a matter of whether you exercise or diet, but also the genetic lottery. So, if you find yourself in your feelings, in your thoughts about things, being hampered by what your body looks like or feels like as you age, there's something going on there that's a problem. From a Stoic perspective, this would call for analysis. Why am I finding that my feelings are being hampered by the way that my body looks? It could be, sense of shame or something like that. And there may be all sorts of other external factors involved. We live in a culture that tends to say youthful bodies are good, old bodies are bad, even though we have the obligatory, especially since the boomers are now retiring, ads that say old bodies are beautiful too. A lot of people don't really believe that. If you find yourself being upset about that, Epictetus says, okay, then if you're being a Stoic, you would realize that you're being hampered or prevented in some way, and you would blame yourself. You would say, there's something wrong with the way I'm looking at things. It's not just that the world is messed up and, I need to go carry a protest sign about these advertisements around Procter & Gamble or something like that, or get on message boards. I can't believe that they think that old bodies don't look good or something like that. Instead, you can focus on yourself and say, why is it that this is bothering me? Why is it that I let this get to me? And if you carry out an analysis like that, then you can start reworking the way in which you think and feel about the topic. He goes on and he says, if somebody compliments a person like this, he smiles to himself at the person complimenting. Why does he smile to himself at the person complimenting? Does he smile because he says, I'm so glad they finally figured out what a great guy I am? No, he's smiling because he says, clearly whatever this person complimented me on, he thinks that's a good thing. And if we put it into a broader perspective, maybe that's not such a big deal. But if they want to be nice and compliment me, that's fine. When another person censures them, says, you're a bad person, you're doing the wrong thing, he makes no defense. Why does he make no defense? Perhaps because oftentimes defending ourselves doesn't really succeed. We defend ourselves in large part talking past the other person. When somebody criticizes us, if they have a criticism that's on base, then really we ought to take it into consideration and say, yeah, you're right about that. If it's off base because they've got a mistaken viewpoint on things, and we defending ourselves against them and telling them how they've got it wrong, how they're the one really at fault, and et cetera, is probably not going to get through to them, let alone change their mind. It may add fuel to the fire. So if the goal is to work out a good relationship with another person, it can be counterproductive at times to defend yourself, particularly if you don't have all these things sort of straight in your own head. Then you can end up launching attacks yourself. So he goes on, and here's the most interesting piece of advice. He says, a person like this goes around like an invalid, being careful not to disturb, before it has grown firm, any part which is getting well. So when you're sick, like, you break an arm, right? They put your arm in a cast, or maybe it's in a splint, or who knows what else, right? You don't keep working out with that, and you try not to mess it up. You want it to heal. So similarly, if you know that you have problems in a given area of your life and you're working on those, you will be extra careful not to screw those things up. Because if we're going to follow this medical metaphor out, if something heals wrongly, it's going to be misshapen and you're never really going to be able to use it well. So if the bones need to be set, if the muscles need to reconfigure themselves, if a wound has to heal, you have to give it the time and not keep poking at it, not keep messing around with it. So he goes on and he says, he's put away from himself every desire, and he's transferred his aversions to those things only of what is under our control, which are contrary to nature. This was a point that he made back in chapter 2. He said, if you want to make progress, what you have to do is don't allow your desires to drag you out into paying attention to all the things in the world, like how people think about you, or whether you're getting that promotion or not. It's not that it doesn't matter at all, but you don't have to be driven by desire to focus on it. Great example of this, you post something in social media, people do this all the time. They'll post something and then they go back to it. How many likes did I get? How many likes do I get? And then they're sad if they didn't get enough likes, or they're happy if they did get a bunch of likes, or maybe they're happy and then sad because they didn't get even more likes because they see somebody else's post. But that going back to it over and over again, that's not good for you. That's behavior that actually sets up a bad habit. Because it's easy to do over and over, right? You can set up habits with respect to social media within a matter of days, which is one reason why it's so addicting and problematic. So we do want to transfer our aversion to what is under our control. If we, instead of being averse to other people saying bad things about us, we should be adverse to our own tendencies to do things that are bad. Bad for us, bad for other people. We should be averse to the emotional demands that we place upon ourselves and then experience, which lead us into counterproductive activities and choices. So we can start digging into ourselves and saying, that part of myself I don't really like. We can be averse to it. That can help us then when we want to change things, when we get to the moment where we actually have some possibility of changing, of deciding. So he goes on and he says, he exercises no pronounced choice in regard to anything. That is very strong choices, right? You kind of withdraw. And this is that part about being an invalid. For a while, you've got to kind of let things be the way they are so that you can work on yourself, on strengthening your inner resources, on healing yourself. And then he says, this person, if he gives the appearance of being foolish or ignorant, he doesn't care. Why not? Because it doesn't matter what other people think. Other people can think that he's foolish or ignorant or backwards or not taking advantage of opportunities placed in front of him or whatever. That's their business. That's what's within their control. That's not within his control. And he finishes by saying, in a word, he keeps guard against himself as though he were his own enemy lying in wait. Now, this is a very interesting way of phrasing things. We are, when we say that person is his own worst enemy, Epictetus is saying that's really the case for all of us, particularly if we haven't been working on ourselves, looking within ourselves, reflecting on the kinds of choices that we've made and what kind of person those choices display and whether we're happy with that kind of person. If we haven't been doing that, we have an enemy within the gates, and that enemy is ourself. So this isn't to say that you split yourself off into good person, bad person in a very Manichaean sort of way, but rather we think of ourselves as somebody who is liable to do the things that we don't want to do. And if we do that, we can in fact be confident that we can control ourselves. It's going to take a lot of work and time and effort, but we do have the capacity for choice. The Stoics think that this is the case for every human being. So this shows you, I think, in very practical terms, what progress looks like from Epictetus's perspective. What would it be to actually move along the Stoic path towards the end goals of a fully, developed and realized human personality, a person who is happy, a person who is tranquil, and a person who is untroubled.